Hey, so it's official, right? Um, I welcome everybody. This is the UCCS Undergraduate Student Research Showcase. It's an exciting time every year, every quarter actually, when students get to display some of the things that they've learned and some of the policy relevant research that they've done. Um, and we're always very proud of our students for their accomplishments, but we're especially proud this quarter actually because obviously there's been a whole bunch of enormous changes. And for any of the students who are a little nervous about doing this sort of thing for the first time, don't worry, because we're doing it for the first time too. This whole Zoom business has required a tremendous amount of resilience and adaptability on your part. So I want to compliment you and also thank the internship hosts similarly for their flexibility in adapting to this new and evolving situation. And we're grateful as always for the experiences that you've offered to our students. And of course, none of this would be possible without the efforts of the staff, both the administrative staff led by our Associate Director, Cindy Simmons, as well as the academic staff, professors and TAs. So thanks to all of you. So without further ado, I think we have the first presenter. I should say that the format for today will be each student will present for approximately 90 to 120 seconds. There'll be an opportunity for one question, preferentially offered to the internship host, but if not, open to others. And then we'll move right on to the next presentation. So with that, please, Cindy, are you gonna take it away?
Fantastic. Our first student is Yasmin Berger. If you want to go ahead and start sharing your screen.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Yasmin Berger. I am currently a graduating senior at UCSD and am interning with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And today I'm here to present my project titled A Surge in Non-Residence and Additional State Funding. Why isn't in-state tuition cheaper? And ultimately, I wanted to center my research project on whether the population of non-resident students and state funding impacts UC tuition and student fees. And my hypothesis right here is an increase in non-resident students and state funding will decrease tuition for in-state resident students. And so here in the middle of my poster, you can see my data that I've collected. This first figure is showing the overall population of non-residents in the UC system. And that there's been an increase in especially international students around 2011. This second figure is showing state funding for the UC system between 2010 to 2019. And we can see right here that around 2017, there was a spike in state funding. And down below in figure 3, this is showing campus tuition and student fees across the UC system. There's 9 UC undergraduate universities shown here, and that there's been a gradual increase in tuition over time. And so ultimately, my conclusion for my research was that my hypothesis was not supported as non-resident student population and state funding were not sufficient enough to provide why tuition rates have continued to increase. And I take it from my research that there needs to be further research to ascertain how the UC budget will be allocated. So with that, I turn it over to the audience for any questions.
All right, fantastic. So, so you interned for the governor's office. So for anyone in the governor's office, if you want to go ahead and just raise your hand using the bottom below, it'll actually have the ability to go ahead and as an attendee, raise your hand if you have a question, and if not, it will go to. I'll open it up to the academic team and others who'd be interested in asking a question. All right, a question from the office. So it could just be anyone who'd like to go ahead and ask a question then.
Yasmin, since everyone's being shy, this is Rich Kravitz. What is your intuition about where the money is going? If there's more state funding and more non-resident tuition, which is, I think, about double what it is for residents, and it's not getting recycled into lower tuition for residents, where do you suspect it's going?
That's a really great question. One of the things that I saw during my research was that there are a lot of different facets that are included in the UC budget. So even though tuition is one of the fundamental core funds for the UC system, there are also other factors, like there's private support, and there's also government contracts and grants and medical centers that contribute towards the budget. And so there's a lot of different factors at play. And I realized that the factors that I was looking at for my project, I think there's definitely more to the story, as we can see that there's been an increase in all the different data points that I looked at. So I think that each system also has, or each campus has a different way of allocating their budget. So it also depends on the specific university that we're looking at. So I think that there definitely is more research and more to the story than what my preliminary research shows.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Appreciate it, Yasmin. All right, our next student is Natividad Melendez.
Hello everyone, I'm Natividad Melendez, and I did my research project on farm worker housing issues in California. My research question was, what types of barriers exist that may prevent farm workers from finding decent, affordable housing? And my hypothesis was that farm workers struggle to find housing because of low wages and high housing costs. So for my research method, I mostly did a cross-sectional analysis using National Agriculture Worker Survey and the California Agriculture Worker Survey. I found that 25% of farm workers live below the poverty line.
Sorry to interrupt. It's actually just showing works cited, and so it's not showing.
Oh, okay.
I think you're on the second page, maybe. I can see it slightly to the left.
Yeah,
okay.
I'll fix it. One moment. I thought I was sharing the PDF document. Okay, can you see my poster now?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, should I begin again?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and start from the beginning? Thanks.
Sorry about that. Okay, so I did my research project on farm worker housing issues in California. And for my research question, I wanted to know what types of barriers exist that may prevent farm workers from finding decent, affordable housing. And my hypothesis was they struggle to find housing because of high housing costs and low wages. And my main research method was using cross-sectional analysis from the National Agriculture Worker Survey and the California Agriculture Worker Survey. I learned that farm workers make between $17,000 and $20,000 a year, and 25% live below the poverty line. Approximately 75% are undocumented, and therefore they do not qualify for affordable government subsidized housing. And figure 2 shows a sharp decline in federally funded housing units in the last 25 years by the USDA Farm Labor Housing Program. Figure 3 shows that most farm workers live in private market housing because other options are very limited. And as you can see in figure 1, the main housing type is single family homes. and units tend to be overcrowded, substandard, lack basic amenities, and often are shared with non-family members. And some farm workers live in informal dwellings, such as motels, garages, cars, and tents. An additional challenge farm workers face is housing discrimination. Because of all these factors, homeownership is out of reach for many farm workers. In conclusion, farm workers have limited access to decent, affordable housing, not only because of low wages and high housing costs, as my hypothesis said, but also because of a decline in rural provider housing, housing discrimination, and exclusion from federally funded housing assistance programs. My policy recommendations are to increase federal funding for farm worker housing and make undocumented immigrants eligible for assistance. Also, to build more affordable housing, increase farm worker wages, and eliminate discriminatory housing barriers. Thank you. I will take a question now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Natividad. And so Natividad also interned in the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office. And so if anyone from the office has a question, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and call on you. All right, and then if not, we can go ahead and open it up to the audience.
Hey, Natividad, I have a question for you about your project here. It's a nice job here. But I was wondering, since you were only able to
Ross, can you say who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, hey, I'm Ross. I'm sorry. New for everyone, including me. I'm Ross. I'm the teaching assistant for a variety of classes at UCCS.
Fantastic.
But I have a question for you, Natividad, related to the data you've got there. You've only got data up until basically 2009, and I know that's 10. I'm sorry, and that's probably due to just limitations in the survey type that you used and the data you used. What do you think happens now? Like, so the next 10 years after the data that you have ended, what would you extrapolate and suggest is occurring now?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. I think farm workers it will get harder for them to find affordable, decent housing, because every year, like, mortgage prices and rent prices are raising in California. So it wouldn't be surprising if these numbers dropped for like affordable housing units available. And also federal funding for farm worker housing is continuing to decline, as you can see in figure 2. So unless like more funding is allocated to farm workers, I don't see that number going up in the next few or 10 years.
May I? I'd like to ask. May I ask a question?
Absolutely. And then Tom, did you want to go ahead and just say
who I am? Yes, I'm Tom Seymour. I'm a professor. I teach the Politics 108 course. You know, I think it's really interesting what you've done. And if you pursue this topic with further research, I'd be interested in seeing what you think about what the sources of income are going to be. You know, whether we can reliably depend upon federal support, and secondly, whether the state will have the resources in the future, given current situation and the financial outlook, to be able to do this. And I live in the Napa Valley, and I know that what has happened here is a lot of vineyards and grape growers are the main industry. They have pooled money, they have raised money and built housing for farm workers. And so in a way, privatizing the issue of not relying on the government. Do you see that, or is that something that you would be possibly looking at as sources of revenue for doing this?
Yeah, I think that would be a great source of revenue for farm worker housing. From my research, I did hear that it is difficult for some communities to support farm worker housing because of like the not in my backyard movement, as you probably are aware of. But I'm glad that some communities are supporting farm workers, and I hope that other communities can help house farm workers also. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Natividad. Fantastic. All right, our next student is Rohia Omar.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can go ahead and hear you.
Okay. All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rohia Omar, and I'm a fifth-year sociology student at UCSB. In this presentation, I will demonstrate my research on policing women and the racial disparities in police use of force in San Francisco. Police use of force is a subject that lots of media resources over the last decade, and the issue has varied nearly out of control. As you can see, my research questions, I hypothesized that the racial disparities occurs when police officials use against women of color. You may ask, is police use of force a race issue? As you can see on my figure 1, it illustrates the total use of force by race and ethnicity, and as predicted, African Americans are more likely to experience excessive use of force than their white counterparts. But does this apply to African American women too? As for my methodology, I analyzed police use of force data based on women's race, ethnicity in San Francisco from the year of 2017 to 2020. I also analyzed the different primary levels of use that is applied by SFPD, such as pointing of firearm, physical control, strikes of objects / fist, and pepper spray. As for my findings and conclusions, as shown on figure 2, based on their race and ethnicities, African American women are more likely to experience deadly force than any other groups in San Francisco. Although you can see a degrees use of use of force, although the years of 2017 to 2020, there is still a high number of women of color that they have experienced police of force in San Francisco. Police officials should have the skills and cultural competence to protect and serve our communities without killing or harming people. The following policy solutions can restrict the police of using excessive force in everyday interaction with civilians, such as restricting police officers from utilizing lethal force until it's absolutely necessary. Also, banning use of force on a person for speaking back will cause an unnecessary use of force against civilians. And lastly, police officers should intervene to stop other police officers who use unnecessary force and report them to their supervisors. I believe that these police solutions will not only force the officers to use less force, but it will also protect our fellow civilians from any unnecessary harm. Thank you.
Thank you, Rogia. And so a question from the audience. And so Rogia also interned at the Office of California State Governor Gavin Newsom's office. And so, of course, if anyone from the office would like to go ahead and ask a question, if you can go ahead and raise your hand. And we'll give folks a moment here and then open it up to the audience.
Was I supposed to stop sharing?
All right, we'll go ahead and open a question up to the audience then.
Hi, Rogia. This is Travis Baker. I'm one of the professors here on the faculty at UC Center Sacramento. This is definitely a very timely research topic and question, especially given what's going on in the news today and what's going on outside our doors for many of us. Yeah. But we don't really hear as much talked about in the current debates with gender, that we hear a lot about color and race, ethnicity, but we haven't heard as much about gender. And so I was just kind of wondering if you could explain a little bit more about how you approach this question, why you chose to focus on the gender aspect of any discrimination that might be going on, and how that might relate or interact with race and ethnicity as well.
Well, as an African American woman myself,
I feel like this topic is very endearing to me, and especially for what's going on around. I believe that the media lacks of showing women of color who are being murdered or using excessive use of force against women of color from police officers.
Great, thank you, Rogia.
You're welcome.
And then our next student is Elizabeth Jacobson.
Good morning. My name is Liz Jacobson, and I'm a fourth-year political science major at UC Davis, and I'm also an intern at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research and Strategic Growth Council. And I am presenting my project, Hey, Hey, Ho, Ho, To the Polls They've Got to Go, the effect of UC campus activism on student voter turnout. At these if you're not a UC student like I am, you're most likely still familiar with our penchant for protesting. At these campus protests, students advocate for causes that they care about, from racial equality, genocide, DACA, cost of living adjustments, union negotiations, and President Trump's election and policies, among many other issues. My question was, do these political protests influence student voter turnout? Research from UC Santa Cruz has shown that young people are actively engaged in advocating for causes they care about, but are still the least likely cohort to vote. And in 2016, only 4 out of 10 eligible UC undergraduates voted. Using student newspapers, the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement, and the California Civic Engagement Project, I compared the number of protests in the months leading up to the 2016 and 2018 elections with the campus voter turnout, as seen in Figure 3. What's especially notable is after the 2016 election, the number of protests increased a lot, as seen in Figure 1. Many campuses launched initiatives to increase voter turnout, which seems to have made a difference, especially when combined with new election laws that allowed for same-day on-campus registration. For example, student voter turnout at UCLA increased by more than 300% between 2014 and 2018, and by more than 243% at Santa Barbara, as seen in Figure 2. And given that what influences voting behavior is complex and intersectional, there was either a weak or no correlation between the number of protests and voter turnout. But I do believe this was still an important question to ask and would benefit from further research. Students are clearly passionate about politics, but they lack the agency or institutional knowledge to express their politics in the voting booth. Campus administrations and organizations need to find a way to better tap into this passion and improve civic education so that California can develop a more representative electorate. And a first step would be for all campuses to commit to projects like the National Study of Learning, Voting, and Engagement so that we can see what work needs to be done and where. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Liz. All right, and Liz went ahead and as she said, interned with the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research. And so if anyone from the office had a question, we'll open it up to you first. Great, James Crowder and Sarah Samden. You both raised your hands at pretty much the same time. You guys could both use ask the question. So James, I'm gonna put you should be unmuted. There we go.
All right, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right, good morning, everybody. Liz, I'm James Crowder. I'm Executive Fellow at the Office of Planning and Research. And my question for you is, did you come across any information that kind of focused on if we created more technologically focused ways to vote that potentially younger folks at UCs would be more likely to vote?
There was a couple of academic articles that I saw that advocated for more accessible ways of election or ways to vote, but mostly the biggest change that I saw in increasing voter accessibility was that same-day voter registration law that was passed that was able to go into effect. And yeah, so no, not too much about other ways of voting.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, James. Sarah?
Can you hear me?
Yep. We can hear you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Samden. I'm an executive fellow at the California Strategic Growth Council. And my question for you, Liz, is if you found anything that talked about possible incentives that are in use to that motivate more students to vote rather than others, and if that's correlated to the number of protests also, since I see that UCSB or UCB, Berkeley has the highest number of protests.
Yeah. So I think Berkeley, first and foremost, is just a more politically active campus. Their organizations that they have on campus really rely on protesting, but the biggest reason for, or the biggest identity that was out there protesting was actually children of immigrants, and first generation college students seem to be the ones more likely to go express their politics via protesting, which is why the UC Santa Cruz research really advocated for better civic education in high school and in the first couple of years of college, because children of immigrants or first generation Americans, students with parents that speak a different language at home significantly lacked that institutional knowledge about what the power of their vote was. And then, yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Great questions, and thank you so much, Liz. Our next student is Marshall Comia.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can, yeah, thank you.
All right, great. So hello, everyone. My name is Marshall, and my research today asks whether or not state hate crime laws are effective in reducing LGBT hate crimes. LGBT hate crimes are a particularly vicious type of crime because they signal not only to the victim, but everyone affiliated who identifies with an LGBT identity that they don't belong. State hate crime laws require law enforcement to investigate and prosecute hate crimes, but not all states have hate crime laws that enumerate sexual orientation, SO for short, gender identity, GI for short, or both, SOGI for short. I hypothesize that states with hate crime laws that enumerate more of SOGI are more effective in reducing SOGI-motivated hate crime victim rates. And in order to test my hypothesis, I did two different research designs. I did a large N study and a small N study. And so for my large N study, I did a multivariate regression comparing the number of SOGI-motivated hate crime victims of 48 US states in 2018. And for my small N study, I did a difference in difference design, which compared the number of SOGI-motivated hate crime victims in Colorado, Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. And in both my multivariate regression analysis and my difference in difference design, I found that overall states that enumerated the most of SOGI had the highest SOGI-motivated hate crime victim rates. This does not support my hypothesis, unfortunately. And one possible cause for this is that states that enumerate more of SOGI into their hate crime laws have experienced more reporting of LGBT hate crimes by both the victim and law enforcement. Future research should be evaluating the current effectiveness of law enforcement in responding to these LGBT hate crime victims, as in right after the attack happens to them, after the hate crime happens to them. And policy suggestions based on this research should include finding best practices in responding to SOGI-motivated hate crime victims and making improvement with law enforcement where needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marshall. All right, and so Marshall interned with the Office of California State Senator Scott Wiener's office. And so if anyone in the office had a question for Marshall, we'll open it up to you guys first before we open up to the group. If you just raise your hand, or you can even just unmute. Let's see here. Perfect. All right, Krista Pfefferkorn.
Hi, sorry. I don't actually have a question because I just got here. Sorry.
That's totally fine. Comments welcome too from the internship website.
Well, I mean, I know sometimes we say a little thing about our intern, and I just wanted to say it was great to have Marshall. I wish it could have been in person, and so I hope that someday we can actually meet in person. Very eager to take on any task, and pleasant to be around and on Zoom, So we're very happy that he came. Is there anything that the state of California needs to do to help with the situation regarding LGBTQ and hate crimes?
Yeah, so California, in terms of enumerating Soji in a hate crime, is very, very ahead. I know that they enumerated Soji into their hate crime, I believe, somewhere in the 1990s, but a lot earlier than most other states. And they enumerated both sexual orientation and gender identity into their hate crime. One thing that usually happens, you're seeing this now, and some states are still in the process of doing this, is that a lot of states will enumerate only sexual orientation into their hate crime and then enumerate gender identity into their hate crime law a little bit later. But California was able to do both. And so my suggestions for California should be in line with what I said for the future research and policy implications, which is evaluating the effectiveness of law enforcement in responding to LGBT hate crime victims. These are obviously very sensitive, and when victims have first been victimized by these hate crimes, making sure that law enforcement takes that first step in being able to be very sensitive to the situation. The International Association of Chiefs of Police actually did a study that was funded by the Department of Justice, which laid out effective practices for responding to hate crime victims of any group. And so I feel like that would be a really, really good place to start, but that would also contribute to higher reporting of hate crimes. And then looking to see how California maybe applies those, and how California is doing, so they can make improvements if and where needed.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Krista. And thank you, Marshall.
Thank you, Krista.
And so our great job. And so our next student is Ricardo Mora Benitez.
Good morning. My name is Ricardo Mora. I'm a senior in politics at the University of California. My topic today is to look at the local control funding formula to get a sense of how it is addressing school resource inequity. California is the fifth largest economy in the world, yet it sits near the bottom nationally in nearly every measure of school funding and school staffing. In 2013, California signed into law the local control funding formula, which shifted its focus on local control, funding equity, and additional support for the largest share of students, 63% who are high need students, that is, low income, English learning, and foster care youth. My research objective is to determine the effectiveness of the LCFF reform at improving the performance of high need students. I hypothesized that an increase in funding leads to student performance. For this research, I selected two California Unified School Districts who have a high number of high need students, which are Oakland and West Contra Costa, and matched with two Unified School Districts with fewer high need students, which are Berkeley and San Francisco. And then I compared the test results for California assessment in math and English language. My findings were that in all four Unified School Districts, English learners are still performing relatively low in math and English. Also, since the LCFF was implemented in 2013, high need students have not met the standard level required for math and English by California. San Francisco Unified received more funding from the LCFF, yet high need students have been showing little to no progress in their testing scores. My policy's recommendation are to raise the funding to the national average and support the 11 billion measure, which will increase taxes in corporate income and personal income taxes. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ricardo. And so Ricardo interned with the Office of California State Assemblymember Reginald Byron Jones Sawyer's office. And so we'll do questions first from the office, and then if we don't have any, we'll go ahead and open it up. All right, we'll open it up to the general audience then.
I guess I'll ask a question. Again, this is Tom Timar. Ricardo, your data is absolutely correct, but my question goes to a long, well, not simmering, active debate in education finance, and that is that how much difference does money make, or how does money make a difference? So what evidence do we have, or can you look at to see, let's say that we did raise the amount of funding that California students get. What makes us think that by just providing more money, it's going to make a difference, especially in the short run? I mean, here where you're talking about the local control funding formula, it's only been in place for 6 years. Now, you know, can you make dramatic changes in student achievement over a 6-year period? Or does it really need to cook and for a longer period of time to make some serious underlying changes that new resources can use? What's your sense about that, Ricardo?
Well, I feel like yeah, it's been implemented since 2013, but like there's some case I found during my research that there's some cases in which English learners have even decreased their test scores than improving them. So I think that so more like funding for programs that like would help students, for instance, English learners to like improve their proficiency in like both of math and English will be like a good change. But also like I do also see like how it's just been a short time since the LCFF was implemented. So I'm like excited to see like the changes they will make in the long run.
Mm-hmm. You know, if you're interested in following up on this, which I think you should because it's an interesting topic, but the crucial issue is really not LCFF, excuse me, but the local accountability plan. It's the plan that districts submit to show how they're going to use the money and what are the differences among plans and how they connect to different outcomes. Just a suggestion if you're going to follow up on this, and I hope you will.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Ricardo. And so then our next student is Leah Timmerman.
One second. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can. That looks great. Perfect.
So, hi, my name is Leah Timmerman. I am a third-year political science major at UC Davis. So in California, the average recidivism rate for juveniles within 1 year of release from an institution is 50.5%. Recidivism is the tendency for an individual to revert back to criminal behavior and interact with the criminal justice system again. A proposed way to combat this is diversion programs, which limit the contact someone has with the system. My research question was, how do juvenile diversion programs impact recidivism rates? And I hypothesized that California counties with more comprehensive juvenile diversion programs will have lower rates of recidivism than counties with less comprehensive programs. For my research design, I did a small N study comparing the recidivism rates for Los Angeles, San Bernardino, and San Diego County from 2008 to 2016 with the diversion programs that they offer. I scored 9 diversion programs from each county with either a -1, negative impact, 0, no impact, or a +1 positive impact based on the type of program. where the higher score meant they were more comprehensive. And I found that Los Angeles had the lowest score and had the highest recidivism rates at an average of 40%. San Bernardino had a lower score than San Diego, but had lower recidivism rates until 2015. San Diego had the highest score, but had higher recidivism rates than San Bernardino until 2015. So I found that these different types do seem to impact recidivism rates, but as the higher score didn't necessarily mean lower recidivism rates, there are other factors that go into this. And an implication from this is that the specific type of program is important, showing that for policymakers, they need to focus on certain types of programs in order to support these juveniles. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Leah. And so Leah also interned at the Office of California State Assembly Member Reginald Byron Jones Sawyer's office. And so if there's anyone from the office that would like to go ahead and ask a question first. And if not, we'll go ahead and open it to the general audience. All right, we'll go ahead and open it up to the general audience. So if someone had a question for Leah.
I had a question for you, Leah. This is Professor Jordan Quila. I am the professor for actually this class that the showcase is for. So I had a question about your methodology. So you mentioned that you score programs based on -1, 0, or +1. I was just curious as to what type of programs would be considered a -1 versus a +1. And then you also mentioned, and what type of programs then would you most recommend for helping with this type of situation?
Yeah, so the programs that were negative were dealing with deterrence and discipline. So trying to show kids what it's like to be incarcerated and such, and trying to scare them away from that. And then the ones with positive impact were dealing with skill building and restorative justice and counseling and family-based programs. So the ones that I would recommend are the ones that deal with offering skills and more education and supporting families and offering programs that way.
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you, Leah. And so our next student is Alexandra Olvera.
Hi, can you all see my screen?
Yeah, oh, there we go. That's perfect. Thank you. That's great.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Alexandra Olvera. I am a student at UC Davis studying political science. Today, 1 in 3 people in the world use social media platforms. One can't help but wonder what the influence on social media may have on our views. Therefore, I beg the question, does political thought on social media influence one generation over the other? My research is a quantitative study surveying 169 Californians ages 18 through 55 on social media usage and political pressures of social media. To test the validity of my research hypothesis, I compared the data by looking at the respondents' usage and age for more background. I studied the variables of their level of awareness and their need to belong with their usage, and their level of awareness and need to belong with their age. I found with the first hypothesis, around 56% of respondents who answered using social media a great deal or moderately were both one of the largest group to be hesitant to post something controversial and to trust the news that is shared with them on their feed. For the second hypothesis, I came to the conclusion that mainstream political thought does have more of an influence on millennials and Generation X than baby boomers and Generation Z. This could be due to the lack of respondents from those age categories. However, I couldn't help but wonder the commonality between the two groups. Both baby boomers and Generation Z were born in a very politically active society. Overall, showing that the trust in others in sharing accurate news and fearing judgment from others to post what they want could unintentionally lead social media to conform a certain way politically. Given our society's growing addiction to social media, smartphones, and other forms of digital communication, it has ushered in a more interconnected society, but one that is almost entirely dependent on the technological infrastructure of massive telecommunication, software, and IT corporations. This could potentially become a massive problem that will need to be resolved by policymakers, not just through limiting and investigating artificial intelligence, but by actually collecting data on human behavior and consequences of cyber conformity. Thank you, and I can take any questions now.
Great, thank you so much, Alexandra. And so Alexandra interned in the Office of California State Assembly Member Cody Petrie Norris. And so if anyone from the office would like to go ahead, and I already see a hand up. So Andrew Medina.
Hi, this is Andrew Medina with Assemblywoman Cody Petrie Norris's office, the legislative director in the office. I've been so grateful to be able to work with Alex. My question is, and this is actually a very relevant topic right now, considering all the conversations that's happening around Twitter and Facebook, and also around the Black Lives Matters protests and a lot of the misinformation that's been going through social media. I guess one of my questions is basically, what kind of policy solutions, or in terms of what should these platforms be doing in terms of fact checking? I know you had mentioned that there might be folks who are skeptical of some of these platforms. What do you think would be sort of the responsibility of some of these platforms, or what they could do better to build that trust with the platforms?
Yeah, in terms of like companies like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram and things like those companies, if you're referring to that specifically, I feel like lately, Facebook, especially in the past 4 years, has been invited a lot to Congress to come and be interviewed on certain situations that have happened in the past. And so I definitely think that holding accountable those specific social media companies is really crucial, especially now. And so I think it's going to be pertinent for them to hold some sort of transparency with what they post and what people report to be either inappropriate or anything like that on their social media. Sometimes it can limit freedom of speech. And so that has been found quite problematic over the past decade with these social media companies. So I think it's imperative for policymakers to hold them accountable through either creating transparency legislation. As I mentioned, it would be crucial for policymakers to also maybe implement data collection on this specific, human behavior on social media and cyber conformity. So I'd say those are the two things, is transparency and maybe collecting more data, both as a governmental institution as well.
Great, thank you, Angie, for the question. Thank you, Alexandra. And so it looks like we have another question. So Claire Conlon.
Hi, this is Claire. I'm Chief of Staff to Assemblywoman Cody Petrie Norris, and it's been such a pleasure working with Alex, even though we've all been sheltering in place. She's just been incredible as we research bills and appropriations and how policy changes are affecting our residents in Orange County. And looking at this, like Andrew said, it's so fascinating because we're seeing, especially when we do polling in Orange County, that people are so politically divided in where they're getting the news and what they're sharing on social media. And so I'm just wondering if in your research you found what we can do at all to bridge that partisan divide on social media.
Yeah, so that's what, thank you for the question, Claire. That's what I found with the need to belong portion of my data and research, is that most people are hesitant to post anything due to the fact of being judged, due to the fact of maybe creating some conflict between their fellow users or someone that is on their social media platform. And so I think maybe bridging this gap of, especially now today, we're seeing it more than ever, is I've been finding that people who I have never seen speak politically on any issue are speaking now. And so I think, when I started this research, I never would have thought, what I'm seeing today on my social media feed, which is seeing people who are politically inactive become politically active. And I think, now it's crucial more than ever to make sure that we allow everyone to feel comfortable in using their voices on their social media platform and to not judge one another. So it's more of a psychological and human behavior type of issue that needs to be fixed. rather than specifically a policy issue. So I think it's more so of, you know, studying that human behavior and seeing what social media companies can do to make sure that, you know, they're allowing people to express their opinions freely without, you know, being attacked online or bullied online as well from their fellow users.
Thank you, Claire, for the question, and thank you, Alexandra. And so our next student is Jenna Smith.
Hello, everyone. Can we see the screen okay?
Yep, looks great. Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Jenna Smith, and I'm studying the relationship between test optional policies and diversities on college campuses. And so every year, 3 million students take the SAT, which is 3 million students judged and ranked on the same sets of questions, having varying resources. And a lot of researchers claim that the SAT is not necessarily an accurate measure of a student's future success, but instead a measure of resources. But without it, it's kind of hard to judge what student deserves what spot at the same institutions. However, during the pandemic, the SAT requirement was waived for many incoming first years. And so it begs the question on how necessary the SAT really is for college admissions. And so I looked at data from several test optional universities, and I compared the students who submitted their SAT scores and those who did not. And so I looked for differences in diversity, academics, and graduation rates. And you can see in the first figure that average SAT scores are lower for the non-submitters than for the submitters. And if you control for the unusually above average test scores that you do get from some students in both categories, you'll see that the difference is even greater. And so it's important to acknowledge the fact that SAT scores are very varying across people who are applying for these colleges. And so when you look at the profiles of the non-submitters, you see higher representation from a lot of underrepresented minorities like women and first generations and Pell Grant recipients. And if you look at the third figure right below that one, you can see that of the people who are admitted to these colleges, the non-submitters, which is on the left, in various shades of blue, you can see all of the increase of diversity that was admitted to the university in comparison to the submitters on the right. And some researchers are believing that it harms the academic integrity of the university, which isn't quite accurate. If you look at the graduation rates, they're very similar between the two groups. And if you look at the GPAs, they're also very similar. So in conclusion, if you're looking at the diversity, it does increase if you look at the submitters versus non-submitters. And if you look at the academic comparisons, they're not very different for someone to say that a test optional policy is going to harm the integrity of the university, but instead it actually helps the university. So my policy recommendation is that more colleges should opt to be test optional, and that we should have pressure from the local government to admit these policies into the colleges and universities, so that way students can apply for the colleges that they really want to go to and that they can succeed just the same as students who would submit their scores, and let the SAT be more of a help than a harm to students of color and students of different genders and first generation students and all the underrepresented minorities. But there does need to be a conversation between students and the advisors at schools to have a strategic plan on when to submit and when not to submit. And with that, I will take any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jenna. And so Jenna interned with the Office of California State Senator Jim Beal's office. And so, and we have a question from your office. All right, so Fred Williams.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, first I want to thank Jenna for interning in our office. She's been great, incredibly helpful. She was there to be in person and over Zoom, and we're grateful to the program for letting her intern. And I have one question. Based on your research here, do you feel as if universities and colleges should waive the test altogether and get rid of it if it's an ineffective metric, or should allow the test optional to allow some to submit?
I'm personally a fan of waiving it altogether, but I think in the sake of fairness, it would be best to still allow for a test optional policy, only because a lot of students sometimes experience things during their high school career that may hurt their GPA. And so I think the SAT can be a really good way to show that maybe you had a really tough year, one year that brought down your GPA, but you're still definitely academically capable of succeeding in that university. So I think that for the sake of being fair to all students, it would be best to keep the test optional and not be test blind.
Great, thank you so much, Fred, for the question, and Jenna for your presentation. And so our last student for today is Eliason Velasquez.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. My name is Eliason Velasquez. For my project, I decided to examine some of the factors that could help explain homelessness in California. With a growing population of 39 million people, California is home to some of the world's most innovative companies and best educated people. As a consequence, the state finds itself in the unique position of balancing the needs of growing business sectors and working people. Obviously, this is difficult to balance. The interests of employers are drastically different from those who are considered unskilled laborers. Employer demands for workers with an education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, otherwise known as STEM, is becoming a growing divide between workers and employers. My study looks to compare the impact that the state's rising share of STEM jobs, along with the rising cost of living, has on California's homeless population. I suspected that increases in the amount of STEM jobs and cost of living would correspond with increases in homelessness. After comparing the trends of the number of STEM jobs, cost of living, and homelessness, and the number of homeless people, between the years 2011 to 2016, I found that the number of homeless people declined from the amount recorded in 2011. Concurrently, the number of STEM jobs and cost of living increased. It would appear, based off figures 1 and 2, that the claim that increases in STEM jobs or the rising cost of living have no real impact on homelessness, rising homelessness rather. However, in review of the number of persons relying on welfare, as shown in figure 3, we discover that Californians are becoming increasingly dependent on these programs. It is likely that these welfare programs, such as SNAP and Housing Choice vouchers, are reducing the amount of homelessness in California, which makes it difficult to determine the real impact that the amount of STEM jobs and rising costs. It is likely that the increasing cost of living is related to the rising use of welfare, which we have already established as the reason homelessness has decreased. In light of these findings, I urge legislators to enact tax policy that is friendlier to small business and strengthens the purchasing power of Californians, the results of which should lead to greater investment in the state by way of job creation and help people live financially free from the state. It appears that our first battle with reducing homelessness is in reducing dependency on welfare. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Great, thank you, Eliason. And so Eliason interned in the California State Senate Office of Engrossing and Enrolling. If anyone from the office would like to go ahead and ask a question. And if not, we'll go ahead and open it up to the audience.
Nobody has a question.
Tom's always good for questions, so.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, okay. My question is that, or question or comment, question first. Did you look at, how far back did you look at this impact? Because I feel that in the course of my lifetime or adulthood, you know, I've seen this change in homelessness, and it really began in the 1970s with the closing down of a lot of state hospitals and putting people into the streets with the theory that there were going to be community treatment programs for them and that they would be taken care of that way. But of course, the state didn't provide money for that. And so there were no programs. And so many people were simply thrown into the streets, didn't get the medical care that they needed, and that's been pretty much perpetuated. There are a lot of people, as San Francisco found when Newsom was mayor, are people with all kinds of mental illnesses and who are homeless for all kinds of reasons. Some of it volition. They don't want to go into, into any kind of sheltered homes or so on. And I'm just wondering if you took a look at that. I mean, obviously the things you mention are factors, but I'm just wondering how much policy, past state policy, has driven some of this homelessness.
Yeah, to answer your first question in there, I attempted to look further back in time, and in short, it was really difficult for me to find reliable data. The data source I used to track homelessness was from the HUD Exchange platform. They call something COC, the Continuum of Care Reports. And so I referred to those annual reports for my measurement on homelessness, and it only went back so far. And so I couldn't go back to the 70s. I couldn't go back to the 80s or 90s. I could only go back to when they began tracking it. And they did have information in the early 2000s, but for that same time frame, for the other variables I was interested in, it was difficult for me to find the same, the data for those other variables for those same respective years. So I kind of had to cut my losses, and that's one of the big criticisms of my work. It's really tough to find reliable information about homelessness, but I think this could be a starting point. I think further research can build upon this, and I think moving forward, it'll be tracked better.
Great, thanks for that. I appreciate the difficulty.
Thank you, Lyson. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the question.
Fantastic. And thank you, Tom, for the question. And so there's actually, so Jenna, I'm going to actually call you back because Van from your office also had a question, but was only able to submit it through the Q&A chat. And so I'll ask you, so I'll read it off to you. And so, sorry, this is a question. Have you asked any school administrators or other students about this? And if so, what was their opinion?
I haven't necessarily asked through the research project itself, but I have talked to many people about the SAT in general, and most people don't necessarily favor it. And just from my own personal experience, that could be very much be biased depending on, who I'm friends with and who I talk to and who I surround myself with. So I think in terms of like the actual research study, I have not, and that would be like an additional research to do, as well as like figuring out what test optional looks like, because different schools have different, ways they do test optional, like they may substitute the test for something else. But from my own personal experience of people who I know most people don't favor the SAT because it's more stressful and it's not super great for students who are second English language learners. But as far as the actual project and doing it through like a database or anything like that, I haven't.
Great, thank you so much, Jenna, for the response, and Van, thank you so much for the question. Appreciate it. So, and that is the end of our session A for our undergraduate research showcase. And so, thank you so much for the students who did just an amazing job, and again to our hosts who were able to attend on Zoom, and for hosting the students this term, particularly under very different conditions than we normally do, and being able to pivot so quickly to basically host our students remotely. So thank you. And students, if you want to just go ahead and you guys are all set and you're good. And so I think that the final one, Jordan, correct me here, is due to you today, right? So.
Yeah, just turn in by midnight tonight along with references if they weren't on your poster. Good job, everybody.